So I've got the privilege of introducing retired Major General Clay Hutmatcher, who is I would say, a legend in the Army aviation world. Even though he started out as a Marine, he's become a friend and mentor. Basically, everything you've heard about aviation over the last 40 years, Clay's been a part of. And also, very importantly, hey, where's everyone going? This is we're not done yet. Okay, good. Yeah. This is the last thing before happy hour. So no pressure, Clay. And then, most importantly, Clay is the director of Special Operations Warrior Foundation, which, in short, pays for the education of the family members and kids of special operations soldiers that have fallen in the line of duty. So, tremendous cause, look it up. But with that, I'll turn it over to Clay.
Okay. I failed my first test on tech here with turning on the microphone. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so I'm going to probably spend a bunch of time there on that TV. You'll get the same display over there, but I'll be highlighting stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through an op that we did called Operation Reindeer. So you can Google it. There's some articles about it. It didn't exaggerate my personal valor like I plan on doing in front of all of you today, but it was a good op, and so I'm going to go through it, how we did it, how we executed it. We killed about 100 ISIS fighters in this op, and then at the end I'm going to go through the technology and the things we had then in 2000. It was June 11th, 2003. And what would have benefited us with regards to situational awareness, and I'll sort of break it down. It'll be brief, but break it down by phases, okay? So a little backdrop, I was the Aviation Task Force Commander in Baghdad. I got over there in May, right after we flew up from Saudi and established a forward operating base at the airport there, Baghdad International Airport. And we were focused on the deck of cards. For those that remember that was our primary target, was the deck, or our primary focus was the deck of cards. Of course, Saddam Hussein was the ace of spades, and he had Uday and Qusay and his secretary. So that was our focus, was personalities on key leaders. I will tell you, in the rearview mirror, we got it exactly wrong. The senior leaders were sort of old and out of gas. The cats that really gave us a hard time later were that middle management. So if you think military, maybe lieutenant colonels, captains, those were the folks that still had some pep in their step and ended up being a real problem for us later. So this target came up on June 9th. And it was Reindeer. So I was getting ready to launch on the 9th for some missions that night, and my boss, an Air Force one-star, said, "Hey, take a look at this target. It's out. This was out west. How many people have served in Iraq here? So this was out near Rawa, about 45 minutes north of Al Asad, is where the target was, near Haditha Dam, out in that area." And he said, "Hey, I don't think we're going to do it, but we think there's a bunch of bad guys out there, and it's probably more of a conventional target. They were going to pass it off to the 101st or somebody like that." So we had one Predator, if I remember right, one Predator in theater, and they were overhead, and so we're looking at our little 19-inch TV in the jock there. We're looking at these guys, and the things you always look for. You look for, is there livestock, is there women and children there? And there was none of that. In fact, when we were overhead, they were doing rifle PT and doing little formation runs out there. So these were definitely bad guys. Now, I didn't understand the depth of intelligence we had. There was a lot of signals intelligence that these guys were actually going to break up in three-man teams and conduct suicide attacks across Iraq to the coalition, U.S. and coalition bases within 24 hours. I didn't really know that at the time. So I looked at this target. I pulled in the flight leads from the 160th, my Little Bird gun guys, the 60 guys, the 47 guys, and said, let's spend about 30 minutes on this. We'll build a straw man of how we would do it if we got this mission, with in my mind, the understanding that we probably wouldn't do it. So I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on it. So we put together a base plan, And then we went out and flew the missions the night of the 9th. I think I rolled back into the rack around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got woke up at around 11. And General McKiernan was I think he was a 4-star. He might have been a 3-star, but he was the head person in Iraq. And they woke me up. I went into the Joint Ops Center, the JOC, and they said, "Hey, it's like, name that tune. You got it. You're doing it. When can you do it?" And I said, "I guess we could do it tonight." So sadly they took me up on that, and I got it. And we decided to. So we got the flight leaves together. And the Ground Force Command, it was a company, Bravo Company 2nd Ranger Battalion out of Joint Base Lewis McChord, was a ground assault force. We had 4 AH-6s for the rotary wing, 2 MH-47s, and 4 MH-60s were carrying the assault force. The ground assault force, the GAF, so the helicopter assault force, HAF, for those that don't have a military background, ground assault force, GAF. So the ground assault force, they were going to isolate, and again, I apologize over here, but you see where it says 3rd Platoon GAF. They were driving up in Humvees. I embedded some of my my armament guys and my fuel guys in the back of their Humvees to refuel the little birds, the gunbirds. And they left before we even did the mission brief. The target was on driving distance, was almost 300 kilometers away. So they had to make that trip early. We did the final walkthrough on the hangar floor in Baghdad, and the plan was they were going to drive up. We were going to synchronize for a 0-1 local H-hour strike. That was boots on the ground with the lead 60s and the Rangers. And at that time, the ground assault force would be in place as an isolation force, and the plan was the Helo Assault Force guys were going to push them out of the wadi up into the plains, and then the GAF would police them up with mortars and whatever. So the sequence of events was H minus 20 minutes, so 12:40 in the morning, a flight of 4 F-16s was dropping 2,000-pound bombs along this wadi right here. And at H minus 15, an AC-130 gunship was going to start service and targets of opportunity from H minus 15 to H minus 5. And then the Little Bird gun guys, my guys, were going to start providing close air support and hitting targets of opportunity from H minus 5 through H hour, and then on call as required. That was the scheme of maneuver with fires. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. So what you're seeing here is, of course, you got the ground assault force on the north side, and you see the HLZs. The Blackhawks took the north and south Wren and Napier there to isolate the the target area, and then the Chinooks came into Emu and Sparrow. I was the air mission commander on the lead Chinook. A couple of points here, and it's relevant later when I talk about what we didn't know. What we didn't know going in there is, you see how dark it is through here. That was elephant grass. It was about 2, maybe 3 meters high, which was significant for the Rangers as they were clearing through the objective, because they were doing very close. I think one of the Rangers told me most of their shots were between 5 and 10 meters. I mean, which is much closer than we're used to. There was also caves along the wall of this wadi that many of them were sleeping in. Any Air Force veterans in here? Okay, so I got on a call with the flight lead of the F-16s who were dropping the bombs, and I actually met him years later. He had the command of the wing in Aviano when I was battalion commander after this. And, they told me, hey, we're going to drop these JDAMs. Everybody will be dead. You guys, it'll be fait accompli. You guys are going to mop them up, basically. That wasn't exactly how it went. I do think they killed about 40% of them, but the rest of them were a problem that was dealt with, and the fight went on for a few hours. So at H hour, the 60s came into Napier, Wren, H plus 2 minutes. the 47s came into Emu and Sparrow. We flew from Baghdad up to Al Assad, gassed up in Al Assad. It was about a 45-minute flight from Al Assad up to this target. And we lost one airplane on, we had to execute the bump plan with the Rangers. We lost an airplane due to a starter shaft on one of our aircraft broke. So the bump plan went fine. And then we got into the objective. Once we inserted back up. I don't know how to back up. Oh, wait, there you go. I'm going to go past this and I'm going to go to here, and then I'll go back to Matt Waters there, a Ranger in 2nd Ranger Battalion. So here was a scheme of maneuver for the Rangers once they got inserted by the 60s into the Wadi. A couple of things if you're looking, if you see up to the north an objective Comet, you see that box up there. That was a Sealand container, and that was the 40 that got killed. They were sleeping in that Sealand container. And so they dropped it. That was a primary target for the F-16s. They dropped a bomb right on top of that and killed a bunch of them. Interesting, right here, I think it's right around here. It might have been down here. It was one of these two entry points. When I came into the target and I was in the jump seat of the lead 47, I saw the AH-6s were diving, taking a lot of fire from that side of the Wadi. And every time they would clean it out with miniguns or rockets, by the time they turned around, there was more bad guys climbing up into that hole. And which was, I thought, life's about choices. But I thought it was sort of a stupid move. But what we learned later on the SSE, the sensitive site exploitation afterwards, was they had man pads up there. Actually, when we pulled all the ordnance off that target later, there was about 20 or 30 man pads, which was like unheard of at that time. So the Rangers are clearing this objective. The other thing you don't see here is those walls of that Wadi were about 35 or 40 feet, and they were sheer, pretty much sheer. And, the Rangers moved up, and this was, any former Rangers here? Okay, Rangers, they're awesome. They spend more time doing the AAR after the mission than they actually do on the mission. It was much more painful for me, at least. One of the lead Rangers stood up and he jumped off because he saw the grass, the elephant grass, and he thought that was the floor of the valley. So, when you jump off a high dive and you do 2 arm swings and you know that you probably made a bad mistake. I mean, I think he did like 2 or 3 arm swings. So he hit the ground down there in that grass by himself, and the Ranger said he yelled up, "Don't jump." So he was down by himself down there for a while. But then they started clearing the objective. There was a lot of vehicles on fire. There was also water below these reeds. So we tried to put a couple of Willie Pete rockets in there, white phosphorus, to light it on fire and smoke them out. But they just go right into the mud, and it wasn't effective. So it really was sort of a clear mission for them. And I'm going to let you listen to, this is who I'm going to put on this video here in a second, is Sergeant Matt Waters. He was a squad leader in 2nd Ranger Battalion. I'm still in contact with him to this day. Lives in Georgia, but he took an RPG as he was leading across the objective area. Whoop. Now I'm gonna.
I had enough time to go, oh crap, and I get my rifle up, and what I was looking at was the scope on an RPG. The fire level, it caught the glass had caught the firelight behind me, giving away his position. But because fire was limiting my night vision, I could really see probably 50 meters, pretty solid. And he was right at us. I'm thinking he was probably about 30 meter range. And with the firelight behind me, I was backlit. My whole team, my whole squad, backlit all day long. He was just sitting with me, and so he did. And I see the glass, and one time I get my rifle up, and I don't remember this, but my squad said I got one round off, and I might even yelled contact her. I don't remember that. I think they're just trying to have my ego and think I did my job. The next thing I remember is I see glass. I went time straight from state to semi and coming up. And then I remember thousands of orange sparks going from my right to my left up past my head. And I had that feeling of my arms coming up. And what had happened was he was in a fighting position, probably about to his waist level right here. And he fired a rocket and went right along the ground, probably maybe a foot off the ground. And it hit my leg and blew up underneath me, what I think was right underneath me. So it blows me up, and I've got that feeling of, I mean, something very much later. And then with thousands of orange sparks coming past my head, they come crashing back down to earth. And I must have started going on ass on the tea kettle because even through my helmet, my bitch helmet, not my bitch helmet, I scalped the back of my head clean. Like the hair and the scalp was all gone because I came back down with such force that me through my bitch that it just sheared the back of my head clean. And that's when, well, things are kind of fuzzy for me. But through all my buddy talks and interviews and whatnot, and what I do remember, they said, I don't remember this, and I want the satisfaction no way shot back, you know. They said I sat back up, put my right foot on my shoulder and engaged, and then my weapon went cold. Well, what happened is I had my weapon here as the guy engaged me, and thank God, because what happened was when it exploded, all the shrapnel came in my gun and saved my beautiful face.
I'm so glad.
Unfortunately, we had a hand model and just like and whatnot, but so I fired all my rounds, what I thought was my rounds, but what actually happened was my gun broke. And fired 29 rounds. It was in for 30, at least mine was pretty stout. You know, I think it's going to be on fire. And then that's when they said I started to struggle because I was doing a magazine change, but because of shrapnel wounds here, because I had my gun in front of my face, my hand all messed up, my elbow messed up, my hands were just completely jacked up. They said I'm trying to do a magazine change, but nothing was working. And that's when it's finally laid back. And I think that's been the thing too, because I remember being on my back, and I think the first thing was I had my eyes closed, or it was so dark that I couldn't think the sky goes on my back. That I just felt the most intense pain in both of my legs. And you know something's wrong. You know you've been hit. You know you're not dead because you're still thinking, you know, you're still breathing. And I was sure they didn't want to say, okay, I'm going to work really bad. Which, what did I say myself? I said, your legs are hurt bad. But they hurt because they're still there. I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't hurt that bad. And then I think I was able to wiggle my right leg. And I was like, okay, that's me, that's, okay. And then I lifted my head up, and in the firelight, I could see my left leg was up, and it was kind of like crooked like that, because it was suddenly much lighter. And I could see the shredded pain just hanging in the firelight. And I thought, I put my head back, and I thought, son of a, and probably to my dying day, I'll hear about this. But I've said something along the lines of, that son of a bitch shot my shifting leg off. And I was big into riding dirt bikes. And I should probably ask, I'm not okay to cuss on this too much, huh?
We'll keep it to the PG level. I think you're okay.
Well, I'm just adding the realism, because that's exactly what I said on me. So yeah, I thought, oh, I shot my shifting leg off, and you know, my wife, when she heard the story, was like, oh, so your first thought wasn't about your family, it was about your dirt bike and riding. And I'm like, well, no, it was simultaneous, and there's a lot going on there. I'm gonna see. But that's you know, good Ranger wife is always kind of poking at you.
Keeping it real.
Right. So, I'm living there now. I know it's I heard some history for the medic, and we actually got our medic, Doc Gonzalez, who I still talk to this day. we actually got him in wire with him really dangerous. And right away, he was one of the smarter way guys I ever met in my life. You know, just totally chilled with the food immediately. Just a great, great guy. And I heard him like 5 minutes. We were looking at parts to my right and one my back. And in fire, like, I see Doc is nothing, you know, he's sprinting, he's nothing that he was seeing bullets straight at me. And he slides in, he really this time, there's still off up, and fire overhead, going on, grenades are going off. And here's Doc running up, you know, and you see he's got his med bags ready to go, sliding next to me. And he had his ratchet turned at that point. He gets that ratchet turned get on, stops me from water in the desert with all my blood. And then he starts, you know, packaging me and treating me, you know, doing all the proper checks, making sure I don't have any exit wounds or anything, you know, uh, stopping major bleeding, making sure I don't have any airway problems, immune so I'm talking. And he does this with medic stuff like, hey, keep talking to me. You know, I'm in so much pain after being made. I'm hurting. You'd be alone. He goes, all right, I want you to sing or say your ABCs to me. I'm like, Doc, you know, not this nice. I was like, Doc, no, I'm not singing my ABCs to you. It's okay, I want you to tell me about it. And that kind of, you know, brought me around and say, okay, and I started talking about these, you know, that point. And then somebody yelled at me, and this still to this day, I want was a grenade going out, and someone was all charged up, and they didn't, you know, frag out versus a grenade. But Doctor's grenade and he runs coming in, and he leans over to talk to me. And that, for the longest time, really struggled to talk about because there was nothing wrong with that. And I was always, I'm almost dead, but you know, we're maybe standing on the doorstep. I don't want to say we're not on the door, but
I mean, you weren't singing, you're super on stage.
yeah, right? Yeah, he was on deck. So it was hard for me to talk about how Doc would give his life for what was left of mine. And that was, you know, you hear all this stuff about greater love, you know, Athletics, you know, greater creed, or all the other things we're taught as young rangers and military folk. But when it's put into action and you're part of that, that was something that Doc was willing to sacrifice. Either all of these were part of him just saying that was pretty cool. That was it's hard to it was hard to battle. You know, it's hard to know that people do that for you. And honestly, I'm very grateful.
So, so a couple things about Matt. So we picked him up. We usually configure one of our aircraft for what we call CASEVAC, casualty evacuation. We had it in the back of a Chinook. We picked him up, and he almost bled out about 3 times on the way back to Al Assad. We had a surgical unit on the ground on the runway at Al Assad. But he survived, of course, and he became a cop in Tacoma. He did 16 years as a cop with a prosthetic. So he served for 16 years. He moved to Augusta, Georgia just a couple years ago after retiring from the police department. He mentioned Owen, his son. He's an NCO, an infantry NCO in the 82nd. Last time I checked, I don't know if he got transferred, but he's there. I mean, he's just a great example of the Ranger Regiment and sort of the esprit de corps that they have. The aftermath of that, and then I'm going to I'll roll into what we didn't know going in there, which would have been helpful. And I think technology today is certainly much different than it was in 2003, but we're certainly not where we need to be. Is we pulled off, there was the enemy killed in action was about 100 on this target, which was the biggest op that we'd had. Up to date then, even with the Thunder run up from Basra up to Baghdad with Third Infantry Division. Thousands, literally thousands of RPG rounds and launchers, man portable air defense missiles, 30, 40, something of those, somewhere along that number. Sniper rifles with night optics. So, And they were, the reason we got the mission, which I found out later was, that I had mentioned earlier, is they were within 24 hours of breaking up into 3-man teams, which would have been much more difficult for us to deal with them when they're dispersed like that. A funny side note to that is that, so after the objective was declared secure, the helicopter guys, aviators, were very frail. We got to get back into bed. So we flew back. It landed, I don't know, about 8 or 9 in the morning back in Baghdad. The ground assault force stayed there to do a handoff with the 101st, who flew in. What we didn't know was there were 6 guys, bad guys, that were in a mosque in Rawa, the town right near there. And they were, of course, listening to this whole thing that was going on that night. So these 6 decided to attack, and they came in from the north right in the middle of the handoff. They, what I would call a volley fire, so a bunch of them shot simultaneously at one of the Apaches. It crashed. They were maneuvering to kill the 2 pilots. The Rangers came over a ridge line in a Humvee and saved their lives, and then pursued these guys in the desert and took them out. But a very successful operation that I think, certainly saved a lot of lives. Now, that being said, I'm going to sort of break down the mission. Some of you have probably heard the term F3EA if you've been around the military. So it was a doctrinal acronym that JSOC used when we were deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. Those are the sort of the steps of the targeting cycle for us. So I thought of the best way to talk about where we had gaps and where we could benefit from technology today is on the find piece. We were able to find them because we had signals intelligence. They were calling home to their loved ones because they were going to become martyrs. And back in the day, that's what they did. They called home, which was, we fulfilled their mission, martyrs, not on their terms, but on our terms. But that's why we got the tip, right? I didn't realize at the time, but later the intel that came from the signals intelligence for that was what drove us to put that pred, because preds are like looking through a soda straw flying around. You got to have something. You got to get a vector or some tipper to look at. So we had one predator. When I left Iraq, I think when I retired in 2018, I left. I was the 160th. Last time I was real tactical was probably 2008, before I made colonel. We had a ton of drones overhead by then. We had shadows, we had, tons of predators, reapers, and everything else. We could have used more. What we didn't have on this target was we didn't have what I would call an unblinking eye. So we had a target overhead. We had a drone overhead. We had intel, but we didn't have anything giving us cues as we were going into the objective. So we have that now. We have what we call air breathing ISR, which is those flown by pilots, and then drones. But we still don't have the fidelity that I think would have really helped us with this, which is, do we have the EO, the electrical optical systems, to be able to see footpaths and things like that because we would have probably picked up on the fact that about 60% of the bad guys were sleeping in caves along the walls of that wadi to the north-south, but we didn't know that. And that ended up becoming a real issue. And our little birds could not do close air support in the very end because of ricochets coming off the miniguns. So our pilots were actually flying down in the wadi and using their M4s to clear those guys out ahead of the infantry out of the caves there. So that, on the find piece, that would have been really good. The fix, where are they? All we knew is there was about 100. You never get them all in a group at the same time. But we knew there, we thought maybe there was 40 or 50. And that's what we saw around that Sealand container. So as fine as the fix and where they're at and getting more fidelity on the target, we need technology to help us with that. The finish, I mean, it was a knife fight in there. It was a really, I mean, I don't think the outcome was ever in question, but it was a lot harder than we thought. So the more indirect weapon systems that we have, the more low, especially low collateral damage, because our rules of engagement are very restrictive now. I don't really see that changing much, especially in the special ops world where we are, we're engaging in surgical targets. It's not, ground combat like the invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan in the early days. So, we got to have one, precision munitions, and two, precision intelligence and imagery and signals intelligence to be able to dial in on that target and drive the risk down to a point where we fall within the rules of engagement. The other thing is the exploit, so you got find, fix, finish, and the exploitation phase. I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of cell phones we took off of targets. And I suspect we got maybe 1 or 2% of the intelligence off of those cell phones. So being able to process much greater, and that, of course, the data is now much greater than it was then. So being able to process that, I think AI plays a significant role in that. To be able to process that data and really, I'll use the term pick fly crap out of pepper. So to be able to get that piece, that nugget of intelligence that we need that's buried in a lot of white noise and, get milk on your way home from your terrorist attack kind of stuff. So, on the exploitation, we really need that, and that falls right into the analysis. A couple of other areas that I think would have really helped us. This was a hard op for us to move a force, almost 300 kilometers within just a couple of hours. Logistics was an issue for us. We packed fuel blivets in the back of Humvees, to be able to gas up, and rockets and minigun ammo. We actually shut off we blocked a road. I think it was 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment sent a couple of Bradleys up. They blocked each side of the road, and so the little birds were able to do quick turns and get back into the fight within just a few minutes. But if you look beyond the next ridgeline or 2 or 3 ridge lines down, what would have been helpful? And I will, in full transparency, I'm an advisor for Archer Aviation. I know Nikhil spoke earlier, but I've always been looking hard before when I was active duty at reducing our acoustic footprint. If we can get in even another 45 or 30 seconds in closer to a target without alerting the enemy, that would be a real win for us and significantly drive down risk on the objective, reducing the enemy's ability to react. And we normally the ratio from attacker to defender is a 3-to-1 if you look at doctrine, right? So 3 attackers, early defenders. We were a 1-to-1 or slightly less than a 1-to-1 because we rely on surprise and speed to be able to get in there and get inside them and not give them the opportunity to bunker up and get us into a pitched fight. And it works, but the enemy's going to school on us just like we're going to school on them. And they progressively got better and more proficient the longer we were there. We set patterns just like they set patterns. So we really need technology to help us in that, to help us get indications and warnings. I did the investigation on the CH-47 shoot down in Tangi Valley that killed 39 with SEAL Team 6 on there. And they got us, in my opinion, because we set a pattern. We did it the same way, day in or night in, night out, and the enemy made us pay for that. So, the intelligence to help us with that would be, is what we are looking for. And, because we're in the military and we love acronyms, there's the thing we call the OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, act. And, we want to be inside the enemy's ability to do that. We want to be inside the enemy's ability to observe and orient and just make a decision and then act. And we need technology to give that to us, to give it, Admiral McCraven, who I worked for years, who lives here local, used to use the term maintaining our comparative advantage over our adversaries. And we're not going to do it with people. Our military's gotten smaller. We rely on technology and what what you're doing out there to bring us cutting edge technology to maintain that comparative advantage. And you think about it, this is a relatively unsophisticated foe right here. These are, there were about half of them were Iraqis, the other half were from other Middle East countries that had come in to do to be part of the fight here, the jihad. But when you start thinking about the sophistication of a peer or a near peer, the problem just gets harder. So, I commend what you're doing. My main job is running the Special Ops Warrior Foundation, like Luke said. But I also, they allow me to do some things on the side, and I've also got involved in venture capital. And I am encouraged when I see these technologies that are being advanced. And I would just say I think we're at a point now in our nation where maybe that's going to be embraced more than it has in the past, and the outlook is a lot brighter. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.